If you walk out that door tomorrow, don't ever come back." The words echoed through the marble hall, but they were not spoken by the feared Mafia boss. They came from one of his men, who assumed the quiet Maid would lower her head and apologize. Instead, Claire Bennett simply looked at Nathan Archer and whispered in a calm voice, "I'm leaving tomorrow." For the first time in years, the mansion fell completely silent. Nathan stood frozen, his hand wrapped tightly around the pistol he had been pointing at a traitor kneeling on the polished floor. His reputation had been built on never hesitating. Every person in the room had witnessed him make impossible decisions without showing the slightest emotion. Yet the moment Claire spoke those 3 simple words, his fingers loosened. The pistol slipped from his hand and struck the floor with a sharp metallic sound that echoed louder than a gunshot. Every guard instinctively looked at one another, wondering whether they had imagined what they had just seen. Nobody had ever watched Nathan Archer lose control. Not once. Not until now. Claire did not flinch. She had worn the same modest, Maid uniform every day for nearly 4 years, moving quietly through the enormous mansion before sunrise and long after everyone else had gone to sleep. Most people barely noticed her unless they wanted fresh coffee, a cleaned office, or a perfectly prepared dining table. She never complained. She never interrupted conversations. She never asked questions about the dangerous business unfolding behind closed doors. She simply did her work with quiet dignity. To everyone else, she was only the maid. Nathan slowly lifted his eyes toward her. There was no anger in Claire's expression, no fear, and no attempt to provoke him. She looked tired, but peaceful, as though she had already accepted a decision that could no longer be changed. That calmness unsettled him more than any threat ever had. One of the senior guards cautiously stepped forward. "Boss, what should we do with him?" he asked, pointing toward the frightened traitor still kneeling on the floor. Nathan did not answer. His attention remained fixed on Claire. "Repeat what you just said," he finally murmured. His voice was quieter than anyone had ever heard. Claire took a slow breath. "Tomorrow morning," she replied gently. "I'll finish cleaning my room, leave my keys on the kitchen counter, and go." The words sounded ordinary, but each one landed like a heavy stone inside Nathan's chest. He could negotiate with rivals. He could outsmart powerful enemies. He could survive betrayal. Yet somehow, he had never imagined a future where Claire Bennett simply was not there. The traitor, the guards, the unfinished meeting, and the expensive mansion all seemed to disappear around him. His mind drifted to countless ordinary mornings when fresh coffee had somehow appeared on his desk before dawn, when the lights in the library had quietly been switched off after he had fallen asleep over paperwork, when a warm meal had been waiting after nights that seemed endless. He had never once asked who made those moments possible. He had simply expected them to exist. Claire lowered her eyes respectfully, not out of fear, but out of courtesy. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I should have told you sooner." Nathan stared at her, searching for anger, disappointment, or resentment, but found none. That frightened him more than any enemy ever could. Because people who hated him usually stayed to fight. People who had already made peace with leaving rarely looked back. And somewhere deep inside a man feared by everyone, a feeling he had buried years ago quietly awakened. It was not rage. It was not pride. It was the terrifying realization that he might already be too late. The mansion did not sleep that night. Long after the frightened traitor had been dragged away and the last black SUV disappeared beyond the iron gates, an unfamiliar silence settled over Nathan Archer's estate. It was the kind of silence that forced people to hear their own thoughts. For Nathan, that was far more dangerous than the sound of gunfire. He remained alone in his study, staring at the pistol resting untouched on his desk. It had always represented certainty. Whenever he picked it up, people obeyed. Problems disappeared. Decisions became simple. Yet tonight it felt strangely heavy, as though it belonged to someone else. His mind replayed the same sentence over and over. "I'm leaving tomorrow." 3 ordinary words. 3 words spoken without anger, without tears, and without accusation. Somehow they carried more weight than every threat he had ever received. Across the mansion, life continued exactly as it always had. Claire Bennett quietly folded fresh towels in the laundry room before checking the guest bedrooms one final time. Every curtain was closed neatly. Every vase had fresh flowers. Every polished surface reflected the soft golden lights hanging from the high ceilings. She completed each task with the same care she had shown every day for nearly 4 years. No one watching her would have guessed she planned to leave before sunrise. One of the younger housekeepers hesitated before approaching her. "Is it true?" she whispered. "Are you really leaving?" Claire smiled gently. "Yes." "Did someone fire you?" Claire shook her head. "No, then why?" Claire paused for a moment before answering. "Because sometimes staying too long keeps everyone from becoming who they're supposed to be." The young woman frowned, clearly confused, but Claire only gave her a reassuring smile and returned to arranging the linen cabinet. She had never enjoyed explaining herself. Upstairs, Nathan stood outside the study window, watching the lights remain on in the servants' wing. For the first time, he realized he had no idea what Claire's daily routine actually looked like. He knew where every rival organization stored their weapons. He knew the financial records of companies across 3 states. He could remember every betrayal committed against him over the past 15 years. Yet he could not remember ever asking Claire how her day had been. The realization settled heavily inside him. He suddenly noticed small details that had always existed unnoticed. His coffee was always prepared exactly the way he preferred before dawn. His meetings never started late because every document somehow appeared on his desk before he arrived. His favorite reading lamp was never left burning through the night. Even the old piano in the library, untouched for years, had remained perfectly dust-free. None of those things had happened by accident. Someone had quietly cared enough to make them happen every single day. That someone had been Claire. Nathan slowly walked through the empty corridors. The mansion looked exactly the same, yet it already felt different. He stopped outside the small kitchen where Claire often prepared breakfast for the household. The room was spotless, as always. On the counter sat tomorrow's shopping list written in neat handwriting, along with instructions for replacing several pantry items that would run out next week. Even while preparing to leave, she had made sure the house would continue running smoothly after she was gone. Nathan picked up the folded list and stared at the careful handwriting. It struck him that Claire had spent years thinking about everyone else's needs while asking almost nothing for herself. He struggled to remember the last time he had thanked her. He could not. As midnight passed, Claire quietly entered her modest bedroom carrying a small cardboard box. She packed only a few books, several family photographs, and neatly folded clothes. Everything she truly owned fit into one container. She looked around the simple room one last time before switching off the light. Outside her door, hidden in the darkness of the hallway, Nathan Archer stood completely still. For the first time since building his empire, the man feared by everyone realized he did not know how to stop the one person who had never stayed because she was afraid. Nathan Archer did not leave the hallway until the first pale light of dawn slipped through the tall windows. He had spent the entire night standing outside Claire Bennett's bedroom, never raising his hand to knock. The man who had negotiated billion-dollar deals, dismantled criminal organizations, and faced armed enemies without hesitation found himself unable to knock on a simple wooden door. It was an unfamiliar kind of fear. If Claire answered, she might tell him she had already made up her mind. If she did not answer, tomorrow would arrive exactly as promised. For the first time in years, Nathan wished morning would never come. Inside her room, Claire was already awake. She carefully folded the last sweater into the cardboard box before placing a faded family photograph on top. It showed her standing beside her late parents years before life had forced her to start over. She smiled softly at the picture, then closed the lid. There was no bitterness in her heart. She had accepted long ago that some chapters of life were meant to end quietly. After washing her face, she put on the same modest Maid uniform she had worn every morning. Today would be her final day wearing it. Downstairs, breakfast appeared on the dining table exactly at 7 o'clock. Fresh coffee filled Nathan's favorite porcelain cup. Toast rested beside sliced fruit arranged with the same careful attention Claire always gave every meal. She moved through the kitchen as though nothing had changed. The other employees watched her in silence, uncertain whether they should speak. Everyone had heard whispers about the previous night's meeting. Everyone knew something impossible had happened, yet no one understood why. Nathan entered the dining room several minutes later. His footsteps were slower than usual. Normally, conversations stopped because people feared him. Today, silence settled because everyone was watching him. He looked toward the breakfast table, then toward Claire. She greeted him exactly as she always had. "Good morning, Mr. Archer." Her voice remained warm, respectful, and calm. Nothing in her expression suggested she expected a dramatic conversation. Nathan opened his mouth, intending to ask her not to leave. Instead, he found himself saying the only words that came to mind. "Did you sleep well?" Claire blinked with quiet surprise. In nearly 4 years, he had never asked her a personal question. She nodded gently. "I did. Thank you." The conversation ended there. Nathan sat down, but he could barely taste the breakfast she had prepared. Every familiar detail suddenly carried meaning. The coffee was brewed exactly the way he preferred. The newspaper was folded open to the business section without anyone asking. Even the sunlight reached his chair because someone had opened the curtains at precisely the right moment. Those routines had never happened by themselves. Claire had created them one quiet morning after another until they became invisible. Nathan had mistaken consistency for inevitability. His phone vibrated repeatedly with urgent messages from associates waiting for instructions, but he ignored every notification. Instead, he watched Claire move through the dining room, greeting employees by name, asking whether one worker's daughter had recovered from the flu, reminding another about a doctor's appointment, and quietly placing homemade cookies into a lunch bag for one of the gardeners. She remembered details about everyone. Nathan realized with growing discomfort that Claire knew more about the people living under his roof than he did. To them, she was more than the maid. She was the steady heartbeat of the household. Later that morning, Nathan walked into the library and noticed something tucked neatly inside one of his favorite books. It was a small handwritten note. "You looked exhausted yesterday. Please remember to eat lunch today." There was no signature. There did not need to be. He remembered finding similar notes over the years without ever wondering who had written them. At the time, he had simply assumed someone was doing their job. Now he understood those quiet reminders had come from Claire, never asking for recognition, never expecting gratitude. He lowered himself into the leather chair and closed his eyes. Somewhere between power and ambition, he had stopped noticing kindness when it arrived without asking for anything in return. Outside the library window, Claire carried her small cardboard box to the servant's entrance and placed it beside the door, ready for tomorrow morning. She glanced at it only once before returning to finish the rest of her duties. Nathan watched from a distance, his chest tightening with every step she took away. For years he had believed loyalty could be bought with money, demanded through authority, or protected by fear. Watching Claire quietly prepare to leave taught him a truth no rival ever had. The most valuable person in his life had stayed only because she had chosen to, and he had never once asked what she needed in return. By late afternoon, the mansion appeared perfectly ordinary again. Meetings resumed. Luxury cars entered and exited through the front gates. Armed security guards returned to their assigned positions. Anyone looking from the outside would have believed Nathan Archer's empire remained as unshakable as ever. Only those living inside the estate sensed that something fundamental had changed. The boss who usually made every decision within seconds now found himself distracted by the smallest things. During a strategy meeting, one of his senior advisors outlined an important expansion proposal, but Nathan barely heard a word. His attention drifted toward the hallway outside the conference room, where Claire's quiet footsteps passed as she carried a tray of coffee for the guests. She entered without interrupting the discussion, placed every cup exactly where it belonged, and prepared to leave. Before she reached the door, Nathan spoke unexpectedly. "Claire." The room froze. His advisors slowly turned toward her. Nathan had never addressed the maid during business meetings before. Claire stopped and looked back politely. "Yes, Mr. Archer?" Nathan searched for something meaningful to say. Instead, after several uncomfortable seconds, he quietly asked, "Did you have lunch today?" Even Claire seemed surprised by the question. "Yes," she answered with a gentle smile. "Thank you for asking." She left the room, and silence lingered behind her. One advisor cleared his throat awkwardly before attempting to continue the presentation, but Nathan no longer cared about financial projections or territory negotiations. For the first time in years, numbers had lost to emotions. That realization unsettled him more than any enemy ever had. Later that evening, Nathan walked through the western wing of the mansion, a place he rarely visited. He noticed framed photographs of staff celebrations hanging along one corridor. In nearly every picture, Claire stood quietly near the back, smiling while everyone else occupied the center. Birthdays, holiday dinners, charity events, Even simple backyard cookouts. She had been present through every season of the household. Nathan stopped at one particular photograph taken during a severe winter storm 2 years earlier. Snow covered the gardens outside while employees gathered around a fireplace. Claire was handing blankets to several workers, including one elderly groundskeeper whose health had been failing at the time. Nathan remembered the storm clearly because he had spent those days negotiating an important deal overseas through endless video calls. He had never asked how the people inside his own home managed while he focused on business. A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. She stayed awake for 3 nights during that storm. Nathan turned to see Margaret Collins, the mansion's elderly house manager. She had worked for the Archer family long before Nathan inherited the estate. Everyone else took turns resting. Margaret continued. Claire refused. She checked every heater, cooked hot meals, and made sure nobody became sick. Nathan frowned. Why wasn't I told? Margaret looked at him kindly rather than critically. Because she asked us not to bother you. She said your work was important. Nathan lowered his eyes. There are many things you don't know, Margaret said softly. Every month, Claire quietly paid part of the medical bills for one of our gardeners after his wife became ill. She tutored the cook's grandson on weekends so he could earn a college scholarship. She visited the retired chauffeur in the nursing home every other Sunday because his own family lived too far away. She never wanted anyone to mention it. Nathan felt as though each sentence revealed another piece of a life he had never taken the time to notice. He had believed Claire's greatest contribution was keeping the mansion clean and organized. In reality, she had been holding together the people inside it with quiet acts of kindness no one was asked to repay. That evening, Nathan stood alone on the balcony overlooking the estate. Lights glowed warmly from the servants' quarters while laughter drifted softly through the evening air. Claire was somewhere among them, probably making sure everyone had eaten before thinking about herself. Nathan suddenly understood why every employee respected her so deeply. It had never been because she worked harder than everyone else. It was because she made every person around her feel seen. He looked toward the servants' entrance where the small cardboard box still rested beside the wall, waiting for tomorrow morning. Until that moment, Nathan had believed he was trying to stop a maid from leaving his house. Now he realized something far more painful. He was watching the heart of his home quietly prepare to walk away. And for the first time in his life, he had no idea how to convince someone to stay without relying on power, money, or fear. That night, rain began falling just after sunset. Soft drops tapped against the mansion's tall windows while distant thunder rolled across the hills surrounding the estate. Nathan Archer remained alone in his office, unable to concentrate on the stack of contracts waiting for his signature. Every few minutes, his eyes drifted toward the clock. Tomorrow. The word refused to leave his mind. Tomorrow Claire Bennett would walk away. He had spent the entire day searching for a reason to stop her, yet he still did not know why she had decided to leave. Pride kept him from asking directly, but curiosity slowly became stronger than pride. Across the mansion, Claire quietly completed her final evening routine. She watered the plants lining the eastern hallway, checked that every exterior door was locked, and prepared tomorrow's breakfast ingredients so the kitchen staff would have an easier morning. Nothing about her movements suggested she expected anyone to notice. She simply wanted to leave the house in better condition than she had found it. As she passed the library, she noticed the light was still on. Nathan sat inside, staring at an open book without turning a single page. Claire hesitated before knocking gently on the partially opened door. "Mr. Archer?" Nathan looked up immediately. "Come in." She stepped inside. "I noticed you skipped dinner again," she said softly. "I made some soup. Would you like me to warm it?" Nathan almost replied with his usual answer. "No, I'm busy," but the words never came. Instead, he quietly nodded. "Thank you." 10 minutes later, Claire returned carrying a simple bowl of homemade chicken soup with fresh bread. She placed it on the desk and turned to leave, but Nathan finally spoke the question that had followed him all day. "Why tomorrow?" Claire stopped. She remained facing the window for several seconds before answering. "Because if I stay one more day, I won't have the courage to leave." Nathan frowned. "Leave for what?" Claire slowly turned back toward him. Her smile was gentle, but her eyes carried a sadness he had never noticed before. "Not for someone else," she said quietly, almost reading his thoughts. "Not because I hate this place, and not because of you." Nathan felt a brief wave of relief, immediately followed by confusion. Then why? Claire lowered her gaze to her hands. A month ago, I received a letter. She reached into the pocket of her apron and carefully unfolded a worn envelope that had clearly been opened many times. My aunt lives in Oregon. She's the only family I have left. Her health has been getting worse. Nathan listened without interrupting. She owns a small bookstore, Claire continued. The doctors told her she won't be able to manage it much longer. She asked if I would come help her before it's too late. Nathan stared at the letter in silence. The explanation was so simple, yet somehow he had imagined something far more dramatic. Claire smiled faintly. She spent her life taking care of me after my parents passed away. Now it's my turn to take care of her. Nathan looked down at the bowl of soup sitting untouched on his desk. He realized Claire's decision had never been about escaping the mansion. It had been about honoring someone she loved. There was no betrayal, no hidden agenda, only loyalty, the same quiet loyalty she had shown every person around her for years. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He asked. Claire answered honestly. Because I knew you were busy. I didn't want my personal life to become another problem for you to solve. The sentence struck Nathan harder than any accusation could have. She had carried the burden alone because she believed his time was too valuable to spend on her worries. He suddenly remembered every occasion when Claire had quietly stepped aside whenever business interrupted personal conversations. She had never asked for raises, vacations, or special treatment. She had only asked to do her work well. Nathan finally picked up the spoon and tasted the soup. It was warm, comforting, and familiar. He realized it might be the last meal Claire would ever prepare for him. As she reached the doorway, Nathan called her name once more. She turned, waiting patiently. For several long seconds, he searched for words powerful enough to change her mind. None came. The feared man who could command hundreds with a single sentence discovered that the only words he truly needed had never been spoken before. Claire, he said quietly, his voice almost unrecognizable. I should have thanked you a long time ago. Claire's gentle smile grew slightly brighter. You're thanking me now, she replied. Sometimes that's enough. Then she walked out of the library, leaving Nathan alone with a bowl of cooling soup, an unopened letter lying on his desk, and the painful realization that kindness often leaves without making a sound until the silence becomes impossible to bear. Morning arrived far too quickly. The first rays of sunlight stretched across the mansion's marble floors, painting long golden lines through the grand entrance hall. It was the kind of peaceful morning Claire Bennett had always loved. Birds sang outside the gardens, the fountain murmured quietly in the courtyard, and the scent of fresh coffee drifted through the kitchen. Everything appeared exactly as it had every other day. Only this morning carried an ending. Claire woke before everyone else, just as she always had. She made her bed carefully, folded the blanket one final time, and looked around the modest room that had been her home for nearly 4 years. The walls were plain. The furniture was simple. Yet every corner held memories that money could never buy. She picked up the small cardboard box she had packed the night before and smiled softly. It was surprisingly light. Her entire life fit inside it. Before leaving the room, she placed the key on the neatly folded bedsheet for the next employee who might one day live there. Downstairs, she prepared breakfast exactly as she always had. Fresh coffee for Nathan. Fruit arranged neatly on a white plate. Toast lightly buttered. The routine comforted her. She believed some endings deserved the dignity of normalcy instead of dramatic farewells. One by one, the household staff entered the kitchen. Nobody spoke much. The silence carried emotions words could not express. Margaret Collins stepped forward first and wrapped Claire in a warm embrace. This house won't be the same, she whispered. Claire smiled gently. You'll all take good care of one another. Several employees wiped away quiet tears. Even the gardeners and security guards found reasons to pass through the kitchen simply to wish her well. Claire thanked every one of them individually, remembering each person by name. Nathan watched everything from the balcony above. Hidden behind the carved wooden railing, he observed something he had never truly seen before. People were not saying goodbye to an employee. They were saying goodbye to someone who had quietly become family. As the morning passed, Claire completed her final responsibilities. She checked the pantry one last time, left organized instructions for weekly supplies, watered her favorite orchids in the eastern hallway, and straightened a painting that always tilted slightly after the cleaning crew dusted it. Every small action felt like a quiet farewell. Finally, she carried the cardboard box to the front entrance. Her suitcase stood beside the open doorway. A taxi would arrive within minutes to take her to the airport. Nathan descended the grand staircase slowly, his footsteps echoing through the enormous hall. Every employee instinctively stepped aside. Claire turned and offered the same respectful smile she had worn on her first day at the mansion. "Good morning, Mr. Archer." Nathan looked at the suitcase, then at the cardboard box resting beside it. Somehow, seeing those ordinary belongings gathered by the door made her departure painfully real. "Do you have everything?" he asked quietly. Claire nodded. "I do." Nathan hesitated. There were countless things he wanted to say. He wanted to apologize for every moment he had failed to notice her kindness. He wanted to ask her to stay. He wanted to promise he would become a different man. Yet every sentence sounded selfish before it reached his lips. At that moment, the sound of a car stopping outside echoed through the front courtyard. The taxi had arrived. The driver stepped out and politely opened the trunk. Claire picked up the cardboard box, but before she could lift the suitcase, Nathan reached for it. Every employee stared in disbelief. The feared Mafia boss, whose hands had signed ruthless orders without hesitation, quietly carried the luggage of the woman who had cleaned his home. Claire looked at him with surprised eyes. "You don't have to do that." Nathan answered without looking up. "I know." He carried the suitcase to the waiting car anyway. Standing beside the open trunk, he realized this was the closest he had ever come to helping Claire carry anything. She had carried everyone else's burdens for years while asking no one to carry hers. The driver finished loading the luggage and respectfully stepped back. Claire turned toward the mansion one last time. The staff lined the entrance, silently waving goodbye. Nathan stood several feet away, hands in his pockets, struggling to accept what was happening. Claire walked toward him and extended her hand. "Thank you for giving me a chance all those years ago." Nathan looked at her outstretched hand for several long seconds before gently taking it. Her grip was warm, steady, and familiar. He realized this simple handshake hurt more than any wound he had ever survived. Claire released his hand and turned toward the waiting taxi. She took one step, then another, and just before reaching the open door, Nathan felt something inside him break. The empire he had built suddenly seemed meaningless compared to the possibility of never seeing her again. Without thinking about pride, reputation, or the dozens of employees watching from the entrance, Nathan Archer did something no one believed possible. He stepped forward and called out her name with a desperation that could no longer be hidden. "Claire, please wait." Claire Bennett stopped before opening the taxi door. Nathan Archer's voice had never sounded like that before. There was no command in it, no authority, no anger, only a quiet desperation that made every person standing in the mansion's entrance hold their breath. Even the driver looked away, sensing that something deeply personal was unfolding. Claire slowly turned around. Nathan stood several yards away, his shoulders tense, as though he had crossed an invisible line simply by asking her to wait. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind carried the scent of rain-soaked flowers through the front courtyard, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell marked the beginning of a new hour. Nathan finally walked toward her, stopping close enough to see the exhaustion hidden behind her gentle smile. "I don't know how to ask this," he admitted quietly. "I've spent my whole life telling people what to do. I've never learned how to ask someone to stay." Claire looked at him with calm eyes. "Nathan." It was the first time she had spoken his first name aloud. The single word seemed to erase every title and every wall that had stood between them for years. Nathan lowered his head slightly. "If I ask you to stay because this house needs you, that's selfish." He took a slow breath. "If I ask you to stay because I need you, that's even more selfish." Claire remained silent, allowing him to continue. "But if I say nothing," Nathan whispered, "I'll regret it for the rest of my life." The confession stunned everyone watching from the doorway. Margaret quietly covered her mouth with one hand. Several employees exchanged emotional glances. None of them had ever imagined hearing the feared Mafia boss speak with such honesty. Claire stepped a little closer. "Nathan, my aunt needs me. I know. She's alone. I know. She may not have much time left." Nathan closed his eyes briefly before nodding. "I know." Claire's expression softened. "Then you understand why I have to go." Nathan looked at her for several long seconds before answering. "Yes." The single word hurt to say because it meant accepting a truth he could not change. He realized that loving someone did not give him the right to ask them to abandon another person they loved. That lesson was more painful than defeat. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a small envelope. "I was going to leave this in your room after you were gone," he said. Claire accepted it with both hands. Inside was a handwritten letter, something Nathan had never written for anyone before. She unfolded it carefully. The first line read, "Thank you for teaching me that strength without kindness is only another form of weakness." Claire continued reading silently while tears slowly gathered in her eyes. Nathan had apologized for every year he had failed to notice her sacrifices. He thanked her for every ordinary act of care that had quietly changed the lives of everyone inside the mansion. Most importantly, he promised that whether she returned or not, he would spend the rest of his life becoming the man she had believed he could be. Claire folded the letter carefully and held it against her heart. "You wrote this yourself?" Nathan nodded. "It took me all night." A faint laugh escaped Claire through her tears. "I can tell." For the first time in years, Nathan smiled without forcing it. It was small, uncertain, and completely genuine. Claire stepped forward and embraced him. The hug lasted only a few seconds, but to Nathan it felt longer than all the years they had spent under the same roof. There was no romance in the moment, only gratitude, forgiveness, and the quiet affection that had grown unnoticed between them. When they stepped apart, Claire gently placed one hand on his arm. "You asked me once why tomorrow," she said softly. "The truth is, I was afraid that if I stayed any longer, leaving would become impossible." Nathan swallowed hard, but did not argue. Instead, he reached into his wallet and removed a business card with a private number written on the back. "Promise me one thing." Claire looked at him expectantly. "If your aunt ever needs anything, medical care, repairs for the bookstore, transportation, anything at all, you'll call me. Not because I expect something in return. Not because I want to convince you to come back. Simply because helping someone you love is the least I can do after everything you've done for me." Claire looked at the card for several moments, before carefully placing it inside the same envelope as the letter. "I promise." The taxi driver quietly closed the trunk and waited patiently. Claire opened the rear door and sat inside. Before closing it, she looked back one final time. Nathan remained standing exactly where she had left him, but he no longer looked like the untouchable man who ruled through fear. He looked like someone who had finally discovered the courage to change. As the taxi slowly pulled away from the mansion gates, Nathan did not chase after it. He simply watched until the vehicle disappeared beyond the winding road. Then, with the letter's copy still resting in his pocket and Claire's quiet faith echoing in his heart, he turned toward the mansion with a single decision already made. If she ever returned, she would never again come back to the same man she had just left behind. The mansion felt unfamiliar after Claire Bennett left. It was not because anything looked different. The marble floors still gleamed beneath the morning light. Fresh flowers still decorated the entrance hall. The fountain still flowed peacefully in the courtyard. Yet the warmth that had quietly filled every corner of the estate had disappeared with the taxi that carried her away. Nathan Archer noticed it immediately. On the first morning after Claire's departure, he walked into the dining room expecting the familiar aroma of perfectly brewed coffee. A cup waited on the table, prepared by another employee who had carefully followed Claire's written instructions. It looked identical. It even tasted almost the same. But something was missing. Nathan took only one sip before setting it down. He finally understood that routines were never created by recipes alone. They carried the heart of the person who made them. As the days passed, Nathan began seeing the mansion through completely different eyes. He noticed the nervous expression of a young security guard standing too long without a break. Instead of walking past him as he always had, Nathan quietly told another guard to cover the shift so the young man could rest. The employees exchanged surprised glances. Later that afternoon, he stopped in the kitchen and thanked every member of the staff for preparing lunch. The room fell silent. One cook nearly dropped a serving tray because she had never heard the boss express gratitude over something so ordinary. Margaret Collins watched the changes quietly. One evening, she found Nathan helping an elderly gardener lift heavy flower pots after a sudden storm. The old Nathan would have driven past without slowing down. This Nathan rolled up the sleeves of his expensive dress shirt and carried the pots himself. "She changed you," Margaret said gently as they walked back toward the mansion. Nathan shook his head. No, he answered. She showed me the man I should have been all along. Hundreds of miles away, Claire settled into the small Oregon town where her aunt owned a cozy bookstore tucked between a bakery and an antique shop. Life moved much more slowly there. Customers stopped to chat instead of rushing through the door. Children sat on the reading rug every Saturday morning listening to stories. Elderly neighbors brought homemade pies simply because they wanted company. Claire quickly became part of the quiet community. She repaired damaged books, reorganized dusty shelves, and spent evenings helping her aunt manage the accounts. The work was simple, but every night before closing the store, she found herself thinking about the mansion she had left behind. She wondered whether everyone had remembered to water the orchids. She wondered if Margaret was taking enough breaks. Most of all, she wondered whether Nathan had remembered to eat lunch. She smiled to herself, realizing old habits disappeared more slowly than expected. One rainy afternoon, a delivery truck stopped outside the bookstore. The driver carried in several large wooden crates addressed to Claire's aunt. Confused, the elderly woman opened the attached envelope. Inside was a short letter written in Nathan's unmistakably careful handwriting. Please accept these first editions as a donation to the bookstore. Sell them if you wish, or keep them for your readers. There are no conditions attached. Thank you for giving someone very important to me a place where she is needed. There was no company logo, no signature, identifying his business empire. Only his name written simply at the bottom, Nathan Archer. Claire stood quietly reading the letter several times. She knew immediately why he had sent it that way. He was no longer trying to impress people with wealth or influence. He was trying to help without expecting recognition, exactly as she had always done. Her aunt looked at Claire with a knowing smile. He must care about you very much. Claire folded the letter carefully before answering. He's learning what caring really means. Back at the mansion, Nathan continued changing in ways even he had never imagined. He established a scholarship fund for the children of every employee. He expanded health benefits for the household staff without announcing the decision publicly. He removed unnecessary rules that had made the estate feel more like a fortress than a home. Most importantly, he began listening. Every Friday afternoon, he met with employees individually, asking about their families, their concerns, and their ideas for improving the household. The conversations often lasted hours. Some people cried simply because someone had finally asked how they were doing. Late one evening, Nathan returned to the library where Claire had once left quiet handwritten reminders inside his books. He opened the same novel and found the small note again. Please remember to eat lunch today. Smiling softly, he placed it inside his wallet instead of returning it to the pages. It would remain there as a daily reminder that true strength was measured not by the fear a person inspired, but by the kindness they chose to show when no one expected it. And although the mansion still felt quieter without Claire's gentle presence, Nathan no longer spent his days wishing for yesterday. Instead, he devoted every new day to becoming someone worthy of whatever tomorrow might bring. Nearly a year passed before Nathan Archer saw Claire Bennett again. Seasons changed quietly around them. Spring flowers gave way to summer sunlight. Autumn leaves covered the mansion gardens, and winter arrived with its familiar silence. During that year, Nathan never once used the private number he had given Claire to persuade her to return. He kept his promise. He respected the life she had chosen, even when every part of him wished she were still walking through the halls of the estate. Instead, he poured his energy into becoming the person he had promised to be. The mansion slowly transformed. Employees laughed more often. Family dinners replaced formal meetings several evenings each month. The scholarship fund Nathan created sent 3 employees' children to college. The old gardener finally retired comfortably after decades of service. No newspaper ever reported these changes because Nathan no longer cared about recognition. The only opinion that truly mattered belonged to someone hundreds of miles away. One crisp autumn morning, Nathan received an unexpected phone call. Seeing Claire's name on the screen made his heart stop for a brief moment. He answered almost immediately. Claire. A familiar voice greeted him with the same gentle warmth he had carried in his memory every single day. Hello, Nathan. Hearing her speak his name again brought an unexpected smile to his face. Is everything all right? Nathan asked, unable to hide his concern. Yes, Claire replied softly. Actually, better than all right. My aunt wanted me to thank you. Nathan frowned slightly. For what? Claire laughed quietly. You really thought she wouldn't discover who paid for the roof repairs after the winter storm? Or who quietly covered the bookstore's new heating system? Nathan rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly embarrassed. I asked them not to tell anyone. I know, Claire answered. That's why she figured it out. There was a comfortable silence between them before Claire spoke again. She passed away peacefully 3 weeks ago. Nathan closed his eyes. I'm so sorry, Claire. Thank you. Her voice remained calm, though touched with sadness. She spent her final months surrounded by books she loved and people who cared about her. That's all she ever wanted. Nathan wished he could find better words, but sometimes sympathy needed only honesty. How are you? He asked quietly. Claire took a slow breath. I'm learning that saying goodbye hurts less when you know you've stayed until the very end. Nathan understood exactly what she meant. After another brief silence, Claire surprised him. Nathan, would you mind if I visited the mansion for a few days? He smiled before she even finished the sentence. You never have to ask permission to come home. Several days later, a familiar taxi stopped in front of the estate. The mansion looked different than Claire remembered. The flower gardens were larger. Children's laughter echoed from a nearby playground Nathan had built for employees' families. The atmosphere no longer felt heavy with fear. It felt alive. As Claire stepped out carrying the same cardboard box she had left with nearly a year earlier, every employee rushed outside to greet her. Warm hugs, joyful tears, and heartfelt laughter filled the front courtyard. Margaret embraced her tightly. We've missed you every single day. Claire smiled through tears as she greeted everyone by name. Finally, she looked toward the mansion entrance. Nathan stood quietly on the top step, wearing a simple dark sweater instead of an expensive tailored suit. There were no guards surrounding him, no dramatic entrance, just a man waiting patiently. He walked toward Claire until only a few feet separated them. Neither spoke immediately. They simply smiled, seeing how much both of them had changed. Nathan noticed the quiet confidence in Claire's eyes. Claire noticed the peace in Nathan's expression. Welcome home, Nathan said softly. Claire looked around the estate once more. It no longer resembled the lonely fortress she had left behind. It had become the warm home she had always hoped it could be. It really is different, she whispered. Nathan nodded. You were right. About what? People don't change because they're forced to. He smiled gently. They change because someone believes they're capable of becoming better. Claire reached into her bag and removed the same handwritten letter Nathan had given her on the day she left. Though the paper had softened with time, she had kept it carefully folded all year. I carried this everywhere, she admitted. Whenever life became difficult, it reminded me that people truly can change. Nathan looked at the letter, then at Claire. And you reminded me that love isn't measured by how tightly we hold on to someone. He paused before continuing. It's measured by the person we choose to become because they were part of our life. Claire stepped forward and gently took his hand. This time, neither of them was saying goodbye. Around them, employees quietly returned to their daily routines, while the afternoon sun bathed the mansion in warm golden light. For the first time, the estate no longer belonged to a feared mafia boss or to a quiet maid who had once worked behind the scenes. It belonged to two people who had discovered that kindness could heal what power never could, that gratitude could outlast regret, and that the strongest hearts were not the ones that never broke, but the ones willing to grow after they did. And as they walked side by side toward the front door together, the mansion finally became what Claire had always seen hidden beneath the marble walls, a place where peace, compassion, and hope were strong enough to call anyone home.